So B-Wings and TIE Defenders dropped in Star Wars Squadrons this week, and in this video we're going to discuss everything about them. I hope you guys enjoy. If you do, please share, like and subscribe, and let's get to the good bit. Starting with the TIE Defender, I think what's most interesting about the TIE Defender is that it is a jack of all trades. A little bit similar to the TIE Fighter itself, but what you actually have is a kind of almost better jack of all trades than the TIE Fighter. And primarily because not only does it have shields, which, you know, is something kind of rare for the Imperial ships in the game anyway, it also has this kind of overcharge feature that can be applied to speed, firepower, and shields at the same time. You can overclock shields or you can overclock firepower in the game, but as far as I'm aware, you can't overclock them all simultaneously. But it seems with the TIE Defender that if you've got all of your levels, your speed level, your power level, and your shield level equaled out, that all three can gain a boost at the same time, or if you want, you can use your typical speed boost, etc., and so on. And so what you get with the TIE Defender is this kind of extra, this kind of like jack of all trades plus, which is curious. I mean, it makes sense canonically in Star Wars. The TIE Defender is kind of meant to be the ship that is kind of the cutting edge fighter for its time. I mean, the whole idea of Thrawn creating the TIE Defenders is so that they can become part of the Empire's kind of arsenal going forward. Obviously, that doesn't come to fruition per se, but the idea was probably that the TIE Defender would overtake the TIE Fighter at one point, and that's kind of represented in the game. The curious thing is how is that going to factor into gameplay? It would be kind of curious to see whether people will still play TIE Fighters or whether they prefer TIE Defenders at this point. I wonder whether perhaps TIE Fighters are now only played for like maybe nostalgia reasons as opposed to, hey, this is like better gameplay wise. I'm not exactly sure, this is obviously just speculation, but it seems to me that with the TIE Defender being an assault craft and the TIE Fighter also being an assault craft, it's going to be hard for those two to kind of be on a level playing field. I mean, you know, one ship simply just doesn't have shields, and that doesn't give as much leeway as you'd like to think. But then again, perhaps people do, like I say, just want to play the TIE Fighter because it's something that they're familiar with. What I think also though is it's kind of a fun kind of level up in terms of difficulty now. If you want something that's relatively straightforward as a primary fighter for your Imperial dogfights, you can go in with a TIE Defender. But if you're wanting a little bit more challenge, you could go in with a TIE Fighter. And I think that's really interesting as well, this kind of level of difficulty that seems to be introduced in this patch. And it's the same with the B-Wing, I'll discuss that later, but there's this kind of amping up of difficulty or like spreading of difficulty, and I think that's really cool. I think that's a really interesting way of kind of bringing in these fighters that make sense and kind of fulfill a fantasy, but equally it doesn't hamper the ability to get better at the game and try new challenges and become more adept at flying these ships. Like I say, the B-Wing is obviously the other fighter added with this patch, and what I found interesting about the B-Wing is that the B-Wing is kind of the opposite of the TIE Defender. Obviously not in terms of its class, but in terms of its playability. I think the B-Wing is something that's very hard to start to play. If you were to pick between the Y-Wing and the B-Wing in terms of, oh, what's the easier bomber to play, it would definitely be the Y-Wing still. I think the B-Wing has a lot of complexity to it. The way you can send the hull of the ship around on an axis is very much something that would take a lot of getting used to. I kind of found it almost, to me, it seemed obsolete. Obviously, I am not the best pilot in Star Wars Squadrons, and I don't presume to say that I am. So I imagine there are situations where it's very useful and very interesting to play around with. But for me, it seemed kind of almost like I was just spinning it around for the sake of spinning it around. What was interesting though is that this ship isn't so good in a dogfight as perhaps the other ships are, and here's a kind of an example of why. Yeah, so as I was playing these dogfights with my B-Wing, I kind of found myself lacking. I mean, I think it could change a lot if you had a coordinated team and a team that was ready to protect the B-Wing. But if you don't have that, your B-Wing player is essentially gone before they even begin. I think it's definitely a fleet battle fighter. You can see that in the kind of the footage I'm showing you now. It can kind of go a little bit more toe-to-toe with like the Corvus or some of the other ships. And it seems to be able to do better when there's more fighters kind of on the field. What I found kind of hard with the B-Wing was the slow kind of nature of it. I kind of expected it to be slightly faster even at base speed. But generally it kind of made sense. I think it's, again, this situation where you have to create a fantasy of a ship, but equally create some kind of depth in gameplay. And I think what's happened here is you've kind of had a situation where the TIE Defender is an easier alternative option to begin with on Empire, to then maybe move to a TIE Fighter, whereas the other way is true of the Republic right now, where you can start out on a Y-Wing and eventually maybe move to the B-Wing. What I think is brilliant though is that these ships do really round out that roster. They allow for that kind of 5-ship kind of fantasy as well. They kind of allow for that alphabet squadron kind of moment, you know, of an X-Wing, a B-Wing, a Y-Wing, a U-Wing. And you know what, that's kind of, again, a fantasy that a lot of people want to be able to play in these types of games. Squadrons has done this a lot better than a lot of games that Star Wars kind of brings out, in that it kind of fulfills a lot of fantasies very easily, but equally doesn't hinder gameplay for it. It seems very much that these two ships were designed intentionally and thoughtfully, and I love that. I'm very happy with this patch. I think a lot of stuff that was kind of necessary to round out the game more fully has been added with this patch, and I think this game has a bright future. I mean, when I first made a video for this game, I kind of said, will it fly or will it kind of plummet? And I'm in that kind of mindset of thinking, well, it's actually doing really well. Like, you can't really begrudge Star Wars Squadrons right now. It's giving everything that you kind of want from this type of game. But yeah, guys, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please share, like, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell, and check out my socials in the description. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next one.